The team of Belgian mares had been standing in the back paddock since 6 in the morning, side by side, their breath coming up in pale clouds in the cool air. And by the time the auctioneer's helper led them into the small ring at 1:15 in the afternoon, the men along the rail had already decided what they were looking at. The older mare, who was 12, had a small white wire scar on the upper edge of her right cheekbone, about 1.5 inches long, faint, the kind of scar a horse picks up walking through a fence as a yearling. The younger mare, who was 6 and was the older mare's daughter, was clean. They were registered Belgians, both sorrel with flaxen manes, both broke to harness, both sound. The crowd, however, was not a crowd that wanted draft horses. The crowd was a crowd that wanted equipment. The men along the rail looked at the team for about 10 seconds each, the way a man looks at something he has no use for, and turned back to talking about the John Deere 4440 in the next lot over. A woman at the corner of the ring named Artis McCall, who was 76 and had owned a small herd of registered Belgians herself for 40 years, and had come to the sale because she could not stand the idea of not coming, watched the team walk in and put her hand to her mouth, the way a person does when she has just understood something the rest of the room has not understood. She did not say anything. She had been raised, like most of the women of her generation in that part of Iowa, not to speak first at a sale ring. The auctioneer, a man named Howard Pruitt, no relation to Hollis, who had called sales in Madison and Warren counties for 28 years, took the stand. He looked at the team. He looked at the small crowd around the ring. He sighed, small, the way an auctioneer sighs when he knows he is about to sell a good thing for less than it is worth. He opened the team at $1,200. There was a long silence. Stories like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. It was the third Saturday of May, 2018. Madison County sits in the south-central part of Iowa, in the rolling country between the Middle and South Rivers, where the timber comes down to the creeks and the corn ground sits up on the ridges, and the covered bridges still stand on the back roads. The sale was being held at a place outside the town of Macksburg, on the home farm of a man named Floyd Caraway, who had passed in April of the year before, at the age of 82, and whose only son, who lived in Des Moines and worked for an insurance company, had let the place sit for a year and then had decided, in the spring of 2018, to disperse the equipment and the livestock and put the ground up for separate sale in the fall. Floyd Caraway had farmed 220 acres for 58 years. He had run a small herd of registered Belgian draft horses for most of those years. He had been one of the last men in Madison County who still put up hay with horses on a meadow he kept just for that purpose. Floyd had a grandson. The grandson's name was Levi Caraway. Levi was 9 years old. He lived in Des Moines with his parents, in a subdivision on the west side of the city, and he had spent every summer since he could walk on his grandfather's farm, and he had ridden on the wagon behind the team while his grandfather mowed the hay meadow with a horse-drawn sickle. And he had been there the day his grandfather had marked the older Belgian mare, who was called Maisie, in the small notebook Floyd kept in the kitchen drawer, on the page for August of 2008, the day she had walked through a strand of barbed wire as a yearling and cut her cheek. Levi had been at his grandfather's funeral in April of 2017. He had stood at the back of the small church in Macksburg with his mother. He had watched his grandfather go into the ground. He had not, in the years since, gotten over it, in the way a 9-year-old does not get over the loss of the one adult in his life who had treated him like a person who already mostly was one. Levi had asked his father, in February of 2018, if anybody had taken the horses yet. His father had said no, that the horses were still being boarded with a neighbor named Kurt Fenley, and that they were going to be sold in the May dispersal sale along with the rest of the livestock. Levi had asked how much horses cost. His father, who was not a horseman and did not really know, had said probably $1,000 or $2,000 for a team. Levi had said all right. He had not said anything more about it. Levi had a metal coffee can on top of his dresser. The can had a little over $340 in it. Most of it was birthday money, going back 4 years, in 20s and 10s that his grandparents on his mother's side had given him, and that he had not spent because his grandfather Floyd had told him more than once on the wagon seat in summer afternoons when there was nothing to talk about but the work, that a boy who keeps a little money back is a boy who can do something when the time comes. Levi had not, at 9, known what time was coming. He had kept the money back anyway. He had asked his mother, in April, if he could come to the dispersal sale in May. His mother, who had grown up on Floyd's farm and who had her own complicated grief about the place being sold, had said yes. He had asked, careful, if he could bring the coffee can. His mother had asked why. Levi had said he wanted to see how things went. His mother, who had been a daughter at her own father's farm sales when she was 7 and 8 and 9, had not asked any more questions. She had brought him. Levi had walked the lot with his mother that morning. He had stopped at the back paddock where the horses were being held. He had stood at the rail for 40 minutes without saying anything, looking at Maisie and at the younger mare, who was called Pearl, and his mother had stood beside him the whole 40 minutes without saying anything either. He had, before they walked away, slipped through the rail and walked up to Maisie, slow, and put his hand on her shoulder. And Maisie, who had known Levi since he was 4 and she was 7, had put her nose against his coat pocket and pushed, gentle, the way she had done in the meadow on summer afternoons when Levi had carried sugar cubes to her in a folded handkerchief. Levi had not had any sugar cubes that morning. He had stood there with his hand on her shoulder, and he had told her, quiet, that he was going to do what he could. He had not told his mother what he meant by that. The sale moved through the equipment in the morning. The 4,440 went for 41,000. A grain auger went for 2,200. A pair of gravity wagons went for 1,500 apiece. The smaller livestock came up after lunch. 3 Hereford heifers went for 1,300 a head. A pen of feeder pigs went together. By 1:15, Howard Pruitt was at the ring with the team in front of him, and an opening of $1,200 on the table, and no hand in the air. The man at the rail, the same man who had laughed at the boy in the Greene County paper a year before, was not actually present, but his cousin was, and the cousin made a sound through his nose that was not quite a laugh, but was in the family of laughter. He said, low, to the man next to him, that he could not give the team away on Craigslist and that 1,200 was generous. The man next to him agreed. Howard Pruitt came down. 1,100, nobody. 1,000, nobody. 900, a young man at the back who ran a petting zoo outside Winterset and who occasionally bought broke horses for his operation, raised a hand. 900. Howard asked for 950. Nobody. He asked for 9.25. Nobody. The petting zoo man was going to get a registered, broke, in-foal Belgian mare and her 6-year-old daughter together for $900, and the men along the rail had decided this was about right. Howard Pruitt said going once. That was when Levi Caraway, in the second row of folding chairs, with a coffee can and a paper grocery sack on his lap and his mother's hand on his shoulder, stood up and lifted his bidder's card, which he had registered for that morning at the office trailer with his mother as the financially responsible adult, and said, in a voice that did not carry but was clear, 340. The number was wrong. The bid was supposed to be in increments of 25 against a standing bid of 900, which would have made the next valid bid 925. 340 was not a bid in any conventional sense. It was a number that did not fit anywhere on the sale card. Levi had said it because 340 was the exact amount of money in the coffee can, and he had been told by his grandfather more than once that you do not bid money you do not have. He had bid the money he had. There was a small laugh from the rail. Not cruel exactly, just the sound of grown men finding a thing unusual. Howard Pruitt at the stand, who had been calling sales for 28 years and who had 2 grandsons of his own about Levi's age, did not laugh. He paused. He looked at the boy. He looked at the boy's mother. He understood, the way an auctioneer understands, that the boy was not bidding the way the room was bidding, and he understood also that he could not actually take the bid because the standing bid was 900 and the boy's 340 was below it. He cleared his throat. He said, gentle, that he appreciated the boy's interest, but that the bidding was at 900 from the gentleman at the back, and that the next valid bid would be 925. Levi did not sit down. He stood with the card in his hand. He said again, 340, and his voice cracked on the second word in the way a 9-year-old's voice cracks when he has decided he is going to say a thing, whether or not it works. Howard Pruitt, who had it in him to be a kind man at his own sale, said slow that he understood, but that the bid was not enough. The petting zoo man at the back, who was not a bad man and who had 3 children of his own, looked at the boy and looked at the team and looked back at Howard and started visibly to lower his card. He was about to drop out on his own to give the boy the team. He had not thought it through past that. He just did not want to be the man who took a horse off a 9-year-old at his grandfather's farm. He did not in the end get the chance to do it. A man in the back row of folding chairs on the far side of the small crowd stood up. He was about 75. He was wearing a brown canvas chore coat that had been brown for longer than it had been new, and a pair of work boots that had been resoled at least once. He had not been in the county for a long time. Artis McCall, at the corner of the ring, who had recognized Levi an hour earlier, recognized this man now and put her hand to her mouth a second time, because she had not seen him in 22 years. The man's name was Howard Voss. He had farmed 80 acres outside Truro, 15 miles south, until 1996, when he had sold his place after his wife passed, and had moved to a small town in northern Missouri to be near his sister. He had been Floyd Carraway's closest friend for 43 years. They had grown up on adjoining sections. They had served together in the Army Reserve in the late 1960s. They had, in the spring of 1981, gone in together on a registered Belgian stallion named Marley's Justice, who had stood at stud at Floyd's place for the next 11 years and had thrown most of the foundation mares of Floyd's small Belgian herd, including Maisie's grandmother, who had been a 1985 daughter, and including, therefore, by extension, Maisie herself and Pearl. Howard Voss had owned half the stud for those 11 years. He had not taken any money out of him. The arrangement had been that Floyd boarded the stud and took the income, and Howard came up 2 weekends a year to help with the foaling, which Howard had done every year until 1992, when the stud passed at 23 years old, and Howard had buried him with Floyd in the back pasture under a hackberry tree that was still standing. Howard Voss had not been to Floyd's funeral. He had not heard about it until October of 2017, 6 months after, when a cousin had called him. He had carried that since. He had read about the dispersal sale in the Madison County paper online in April of 2018 on a public library computer in the small Missouri town where he lived, and he had decided then that he was going to drive up. He had not told anyone. He had driven up the night before and stayed in a motel in Winterset. He had paid the registration fee that morning. He had not introduced himself to the boy or the boy's mother because he had not at first been sure who the boy was. And by the time he had figured it out, sometime around the $1,300 Hereford heifer, the sale had been in motion and there had not been a moment. He stood up now. He held up his bidder's card. He said, in a voice that carried farther than Levi's had, 925. Howard Pruitt, at the stand, who did not know Howard Voss and had never seen him before, took the bid. 925. He looked at the petting zoo man at the back. The petting zoo man, who had been about to drop out anyway, dropped out. He shook his head, small. Howard Pruitt asked for 950. There was no answer. He asked again. He said going once at 925. He said going twice. He said sold. Howard Voss walked slow from the back row to the front. He did not go to the auctioneer's stand. He went to the second row of folding chairs, to the boy with the coffee can in the grocery sack. He stopped at the end of the row. He took off his cap. He looked at the boy's mother first, because he had known the boy's mother as a girl on the farm in the 1980s, and he wanted her to recognize him before he spoke to her son. The boy's mother, who was named Janie, looked at him for a long second and then said his name, quiet, with both hands at her mouth. Howard nodded. He said, Janie, I'm sorry I'm late. Janie, whose father had been gone 13 months, did not answer. She shook her head, small, the way a person does when she means it does not matter that you are late. Howard knelt down at the end of the row, slow, the way an old man kneels, with one hand on the back of the folding chair. He was eye level with Levi. He said, "Your grandpa and I owned a horse together a long time ago. The mare in the ring is that horse's great-granddaughter. The young one is his great-great-granddaughter. You bid what you had. That's the right way to bid. I bid the rest because I owed your grandpa something I never got around to paying him. You and me are going to walk those mares out of here together, and they're going to live on his place if it's still his place, and on whatever place is yours after that, until they are done living. Is that all right with you?" Levi did not answer for a long moment. He looked at his mother. His mother nodded. Levi looked back at Howard Voss. He said, "Yes, sir." Howard stood up, slow. He walked to the ring with Levi beside him and Janie behind them. He paid the $925 in cash from a folded envelope in his inside coat pocket. He signed the bill of sale. He had the bill of sale written, at his request, in both his name and Levi's name jointly. The clerk at the ring, who had been a clerk at sales in Madison County for 15 years, had to pull out a separate form for it, and she did, without complaining, because she had also recognized Howard Voss, and because she had, in the 5 seconds it took her to find the form, decided that this was the kind of paperwork she was going to take her time with. Levi paid $340 in cash, in 20s and 10s, out of the coffee can, into Howard Voss's hand, after Howard had paid the auction company. Howard Voss did not want to take it. Levi held it out anyway. Howard, who understood about money that a boy has been told to keep back, took it. He told Levi he was going to put it in a savings account in Levi's name in the small bank in Truro, with Howard's name on the account as custodian, and that they would draw on it for vet bills on the mares. Levi said, "All right." The team went home that afternoon to Kurt Fenley's place, where they had been boarded for the year, and where Kurt Fenley, who was 61 and had been Floyd Carraway's neighbor for 35 years, agreed on the spot to keep boarding them at a reduced rate, paid out of the savings account, until other arrangements could be made. Janie Carraway took her son back to Des Moines that evening. Howard Voss drove back to northern Missouri the next morning. He came up every other weekend for the rest of the summer. Levi came down to Kurt Fenley's place every other weekend too, often with his mother and sometimes with his father, who started to come along by July, after he had figured out that this was not a phase. Maisie foaled in August of 2018. The foal was a sorrel filly with a flaxen mane and a small white star. Levi named her after his grandmother. Pearl was bred to a registered Belgian stallion the next spring, on Howard Voss's recommendation, and threw a colt in 2020. The Carraway family, who had not in 1996 expected to be a horse-keeping family in any way, slowly became one again. Janie's husband, who was an insurance man, learned to handle a halter and a hoof pick and not much else, and that was enough. Floyd Carraway's 220 acres did sell, in the fall of 2018, to a row crop neighbor. Janie used part of her share to buy back the 8-acre piece around the house and the small barn. The horses, which by then numbered 4, came back to the home place in the spring of 2019. Levi was 10 by then. Howard Voss, who was 76, helped move them. He stood at the gate of the home pasture as Maisie walked through it for the first time in a year and a half, and he put his hand on the top rail, and he did not say anything for about a minute. Janie, who was standing beside him, did not say anything either. Howard Voss passed in the spring of 2024 at 81. He was buried in Truro. Levi Carraway, who was 15 by then and was nearly 6 feet tall and was driving a tractor on a neighbor's place on weekends, drove down with his mother for the funeral. He stood at the back of the small church. He had not entirely gotten over his grandfather, and he was not, that morning, beginning the work of getting over Howard Voss either. But he stood through the service, and he carried the casket out with 5 other men, and he was the youngest of the 6. Kurt Fenley still leases hay ground from the Carraway place. Maisie passed in 2023 at 17. Pearl is 12 now. Pearl's filly, who is named after Janie's mother, is 5. Levi is 16. He has, in the 7 years since the dispersal sale, learned to harness a team and to mow with a horse-drawn sickle and to put up loose hay in a meadow the way his grandfather did. He keeps a small notebook in the kitchen drawer, the way Floyd Carraway kept a small notebook in the same drawer, and he writes in it the things his grandfather wrote in his, which are the dates of foaling and the names of the foals, and the small, unrepeatable things that happen between a man and a team in a meadow on a summer afternoon. The original coffee can is still on top of his dresser. There is a little over $4,000 in it now. He has not, in 7 years, taken anything out of it. He has been told, more than once, by people who do not entirely understand, that he should put it in a real account and let it earn interest. He has been told, by his mother, that her father would have understood why he keeps it on the dresser. He has been told by Howard Vos, before Howard passed, that some money belongs in a can on a dresser because the can is part of what the money is for. The Belgian team that walked into the ring at 1:15 in the afternoon on the 3rd Saturday of May, 2018, had been written off by a room full of men who could not quite see what they were looking at. The boy in the second row had $340 in birthday money in a paper grocery sack. The man in the back row had not been to Madison County in 22 years. The mare with the wire scar on her cheekbone had been waiting to walk back across the home pasture for 13 months. None of them, that morning, had been alone in the way they had appeared to be alone. Some debts are paid in full. Some are paid in halves, by 2 men at the same sale, one of them small. The good ones get paid by whoever shows up.